Okay. Good morning. Again, it's a little after 11 a.m., so we'll go ahead and get started uh, and do as we start off as we normally do to see if we have any questions. If we have any questions from yesterday or last week or anything for that matter. No one? Okay. Pastor, are you on this morning? What about you, George? Are you on?
Yes, I am, Ron. And
Okay.
I just wanted to maybe make a note or mention. Pastor was talking about symbols yesterday, and I
Uh-huh.
think that it's something that I was just giving some reflection on in reference to how we have come to the point of being able to appreciate again our history and see the hieroglyphics, or in terms of what my ancestors talked about in terms of symbols. That was a way of us studying, and it was just interesting to reflect on how symbols are so important, and at the same time, in our understanding where we are now, that's something that we may need to go back to just really maybe understand more of the deeper teachings and some of the deeper wisdom in that. So I just wanted to share those thoughts about symbols because I think it's something that's how we first learned how to read was through symbols. But those were my thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. You're exactly right, and we have talked about it in the past. I think yesterday he mentioned the bull being a symbol of wealth on Wall Street, and we talk about the flags, and even when Israel back in biblical days had their symbols when they go to war. I mean, so it's a lot. It's a large part of the human experience, and the power that is in that. So yeah, that would be a good study. Would indeed. Is there anyone else that have a thought on that? See something else in that we could
I just got on.
make. Okay. Good morning, Pastor George. Just brought up yesterday. We briefly talked about symbols, and he was saying that how important they have been in history as far as us learning our first learning and gaining our insight it was through symbols as kids and whatnot. So we're talking about maybe it would be a good study one day to talk about the history of symbols or symbols, how important they are.
Oh, okay. So you're not going to deal with it now, right?
Well, we can if you have a desire to. I just don't have any insight into it, but I'm sure you do, because you mentioned it yesterday when you talked about Wall Street and the bulls, uh, and we talked about before. We talked about Israel going to battle and the flags and whatnot. So we've opened it up, but we've never really gotten into it.
Okay. Well, Barbara was the one talking. Bull on Wall Street represents wealth.
Okay.
And, without symbols, there would be no language, because hieroglyphics are symbols. If you look at the hieroglyphics, what you see fish, you see something like M for mountains, and when you also look at ancient Hebrew, you see the same thing. You see small drawings of representative of animals that speaks to something. The writing in the beginning were symbols, and they understood those symbols long before there were alphabet. And when you speak of the symbols in the scriptures, the symbols in the scripture that the Hebrews used when the tribes were set up are the same symbols that we use for astrology now. And symbols carry more power and speaks louder than we probably understand. And the reason they speak so loud is because of the energy that we attach to them. And one of the reasons is we are able to read symbols that's called alphabets now is because of not only our studying them, but also the energy we attach to them. For example, alphabets are also symbols. They're not words. They're not verbal. They're symbols that represent words. And if I say Ron is stupid, the energy that Ron attaches to that word stupid or those symbols that spell stupid depends on how he feels about it. If a stranger call him stupid, that he feels one way, but if I say, man, you stupid, he feels a totally different way. Why? Because the association of the one who presented those words that are represented by symbols and the energy that he attached to those words based upon where they were coming from. I'm done.
I like that. It makes sense. Anyone else? George, you may have something to add to.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, Ron. I think in terms of, again, our ancestors being able to have, that wisdom and understanding of how to, look at astrology or that early stages of their intellectual mind, it talks about the four stages where it talks about percepts, which was basically their senses of being able to understand the cosmology, and then at the same time, their recepts, which is part of the images. And so when we talk about having the opportunity to not only develop our senses, but now to be able to see them in the images of symbols, and then now transferring that into what we speak, which is the concept, and then it lastly talks about the intuition. And so I was basically just trying to just relate to the four stages of our ancestors' intellectual mind and how they were able to coordinate those stages to be able to have us to be where we are today. So I think, again, those concepts of perception, reception, conception, and intuition, that's all a part of just who we are. So I think it's just interesting to fathom how all that works together for the good, because I know we talked about senses before, but when we're able to see it from those connective stages, it really impacts on us more. So I think sometimes, as we have talked in the past, in terms of senses, we know that is more than just the the senses of our sight, hear, smell, taste, and seeing.
Yeah.
But it's much deeper when we talk about our third eye, our third ear, our third nose, our two skins, our two, So it's fascinating. So yeah, I'm done, Ron.
Another example of symbols is the Trump name now, the Trump brand, if you will, and at one point, and even that symbol is changing. The symbol of what that name means is changing. Where once it was a symbol, quote unquote, of a businessman who everybody thought was the premier businessman and deal maker. That symbol now has been so tarnished that there are other more negative attachments to the brand than ever.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pastor. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut you off. Well, I'll go ahead.
No. I was saying I would speak after you.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is that symbol to me is kind of splintered. It's turned into twins. On the one side, is as Barbara has said, it has been tarnished and is not seen as it was, and on the other side of it, it's turned into a type of God. It turned into something that is above being human, and you have people who are willing to give their all to it. So it is indeed has changed, and it has been tarnished, but it's also become something of that to me is dangerous. So, but yeah, that's a perfect example. But that's all I want to say.
Okay. When you talk about the symbol being becoming almost like a twin, right?
Uh-huh.
It's funny you would use that word because twinness is what is how the African sees the universe in relationship to the material world. They use the word twinness, and the reason they use twinness is because it came from the same place. They appear to be separate, but they are the same. And that in itself speaks to how we are supposed to view the universe and along with the earth as being twins, that both came from the same place. They appear to be separate, but they are the same. And when that happens, we began to have more respect for the material world as well as each other. But also, in regards to that, we also began to embrace. Mute your phone, please. We also began to embrace. Would you please check and make sure your phones are muted? Thank you. We also are more apt to embrace the unicity that we have with the material world itself. And what happens, what is taking place is, and this is what I really wanted to speak to when we were earlier, and that is when George made the statement about intelligence, intellect, it brought something to my mind, my memory. I've been reading, studying the mindset of the European. You can't do that if you don't read the philosophies that came out of Egypt through Greece, and how the Greeks changed them, because they developed. That's where the European mindset was developed that exists to this day out of the Greek philosophers. When we look at that, George mentioned intellect. Well, intellect did not come into play until the era of the Greeks. Their Greco philosophers are the ones that developed this thing called intellect. But prior to that, it was intuition, which means spiritual. It was spiritual thought as opposed to intellectual thought. And what intellectual thought, the difference is that intellectual thought sees everything as an abstract, and it sees everything separate from it, so it can study it from a distance. The idea of spiritual thought or intuition it does not see itself or any entity being separate from whatever it is studying. For example, if it studies a tree, then it's studying itself because they are one with it. And the reason that the indigenous people were able to see beyond what the eyes could see is because they saw, they looked, they searched with their spiritual eye. They are as we should be now. And one of the reasons we struggle so badly with our intuitive nature is because we have an abstract education. And in abstract education teaches you two things, if nothing else, of course more than two, but two things that I see at the moment. Uh, one is that you're separate from everything, and two, that you're superior to everything that's separate from you. So this whole idea of intellect and intuition slash spirituality, I think we probably should give some thought to that because I think it will enhance our ability, for lack of a better word, to see beyond the edge of the universe, so to speak, or to see beyond where our natural eyesight carries us, to see beyond where our abstract education carries us, our abstract intellect carries us. It is the abstract education separates itself from everything that is created, inclusive of humanity, and that's the reason those who are quote unquote educated or have a couple of degrees look down on people who don't, is because everything separate from intellect is less than intellect. Thank you.
Yes, and also, Pastor, I just wanted to, concur with you in what I said. I think what was important that I wanted to stress that the intuition or the instinct in terms of that cosmic intelligence was what our ancestors, had, or what they were able to develop in terms of as so above, so below. And so when I mentioned in reference to the 4 stages of intellect, I think what I was really trying to more or less emphasize was the intuition of our ancestors, where that was more of the priority, and then at the same time that cosmic instinct was what's important in terms of the intuition, and that's how we were able to, like you say, see in the dark or be able to appreciate that gift because of who you are. So I just wanted to just make that statement. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said. And with me, I'm sure some of you others experience the same thing. There are times when it's very difficult for me to be expressive of ancestral beliefs and ancestral understandings because of the abstract words that I am accustomed to using that actually separates me from what I'm trying to say. And I do believe that where we are at this moment is to embrace what George brought up about symbols, but also to embrace the idea of spirituality and see intellect for what it really is. The world itself. Let me say this first. I think where we are beginning to see everything now through the eye of intuition or spirituality. We are beginning to process through spirituality, meaning that our processing now is more in tune with the soul than it is with the mind that has been trained to be abstract. And in doing so, we are becoming more and more in tune with the spiritual entity that created us to be exactly like it is. And in doing so, we will gradually, unknowingly, but steadily move away from abstract thoughts and abstract or statements, and we begin to see more clearly the spiritual aspects of everything that is. Because, quite frankly, and we can get into this deeper later on if you choose to, one of the most dangerous things when it comes to separating people is intellect. Intellect is a poison to humanity. And like I said, we can get into that deeper if you choose to later on. Thank you.
I like to say something, and I'm gonna invite you to get back into that. uh, what you and George have just discussed. I'm sorry. Are there any questions or comments on what Pastor and George said? Is there something else that you want him to elaborate on now? Because we can go that way. I just saw something, but please feel free to. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. I've been really giving some thought to what is consciousness, and I've been looking at spiritual consciousness, and I have to admit, I know just enough to know that I don't know anything, but it excites me what I see because it does talk about intellect, and when Pastor and George are talking about that, it just kind of woke that up in me. I'm looking at this stuff. Spiritual consciousness, for lack of a better way of saying it, is looking at thoughts from the soul rather than the intellect. Looking at thoughts from the soul, and I'm gonna try to go into that a little bit, and then let Pastor kind of help me with that. What this article, these things I was reading, was talking about the path to get to the soul. What we do most of the time is when we try to think from the soul, we try to automatically go there, and we find resistance. The resistance in us is real, and the resistance is us. So trying to get to the soul is no more than Ron trying to take the journey of Ron, Barbara trying to take the journey of Barbara. So it is, although the same, it is a different journey. So for example, if I try to say I'm going to the soul, I find resistance there. And that resistance is all the stuff that I have built up in and around my humanity. All those things that were important to me from a religious aspect. All those things may be fears and the stuff that was piled on me as a child, things that I like or disliked in my household with my parents. All those things I have to face. All those educational things, all the intellect, all those things I have to face. So what this article is saying is there is a clear path. And the path starts with the five senses. The path starts with recognizing the five senses, and that is your first real vision of self. That is the first real, even as an infant, you put that toe in your mouth, you put that hand in your mouth, you learn to focus, you learn to hear, and all these things, of course, taste being the one that develops first, but all these things opens your awareness up. The unfortunate thing is most of us don't grow past the five senses. And in not growing past the five senses, you get a strong sense of me and I, and who I am, and developing me. And you never, as George said, develop those other senses. You never develop the third eye or a keener sense of hearing or internally. All those things never get developed. So in developing the eye, it leads to more separation. It leads to more greed. It leads to a treasure that you think you have that is called intellect, because it becomes something that can separate you from other people. Everybody can get familiar with their five senses, but everybody doesn't. Everybody has the opportunity not to stay there. But if you don't have a deeper sense of the next thing that comes about is a sense of your feelings and emotions. If they are not developed, whereas you start to see and feel sympathy and empathy and see beyond self, then nothing else gets developed, nothing but your intellect. So the path takes you from there, whereas you the other senses start developing, and it goes from there, and you deal with all the stuff that I talked about. You cannot travel the journey without dealing with your fears. Your fears are real, and your fears are very, very much a necessity to get to where you're going, because it's not something you can forget or skip over or fight yourself with. So you get past your fears, you get past those anxieties, and even the portion that we talked about last week or the week before, I think it was last week, the why not me? I can be Elohim. Why does this scare me? Why do I think I'm not good enough? So you get past that. That is part of the journey. And it may last for Pastor one day, whereas it may take me a year. But it is a part that we have to go through. So when you go through all those things, those anxieties, you start to see love, and you take a pause and you look at love, and you allow that to develop in you, and all of this is gaining a better vision of the soul, and is gaining a better understanding of your feelings and emotions, and you see that this love is universal. You see that the same love that you feel for self, you feel for other people, and that thing starts to grow into you, and that's where you start to see the unity that's in you. You start seeing the passion in you until you get to the point where you're pure soul, and you are dealing with your thoughts from an intuitive perspective rather than an intellectual perspective. Now I skipped a lot of stuff, but that's pretty much what how I remember what I saw and how I took it in. So any question or comments, but I was doing that so that we can talk about the five senses and how that separates us if you don't grow from that, and it can it leads you to feeling superior over other people. So I'll pause right there, see if that makes sense, and see if there are any thoughts or questions.
Ron, as you talked, I thought about the veil, which separates the Holy of Holies. And it's almost like we allow the five senses to fill us, and as you say, define who we are. And there's that fear. Once we start looking inward, which is the vastness of everything, we don't realize it yet, but that's where the vastness is of everything that is. We have a fear of looking inward, and that's why we want the music to distract us. We want the loud noises to distract us. We want anything in the senses, the external senses, the five senses, to distract us and prevent us from really getting on that path. But once we get on that path, it's like going beyond the veil in a sense. When we talk about the Holy of Holies, it's getting beyond that veil of intellectual consciousness, and tearing that veil and beginning to see who we really are, and then looking back and seeing that intellectual veil wasn't anything but a something concrete in a sense, something physical in a sense, that separated us from the spiritual part of who we are.
Barbara, Pastor, I'm sorry. Let me say this one thing, because what she said was very therapeutic to me. Because that those distractions, when you talk about the loud music or the doing other things, because it takes you. That describes me to a T. Getting past that, looking, okay, why do you fear this? What do you think this is going to cost you? And moving past it, I like that portion of it. That's very real as well. That's very real. But thank you. I'm sorry, Pastor. Go ahead.
You said pretty much what I was going to say, and that the noises distract us from giving any real thought to anything that is real, and it causes us to actually separate ourselves from the environment around us because we're singularly focused on the noise, and we don't know how to listen to the silence. We don't know how to embrace the loudness of the silence. So we are traded for the physical loudness of the noise in our environment, and that gives us a sense of comfort in so many words, because it frees us from having to give thought or focus on anything that is truly real. The other thing I want to address is when we talk about intellect, the Greco philosophy calls it reason. Coming out of Aristotle and Plato, they talk a lot about reasoning. And reasoning is another way of saying intellect. And that thought prefers intellect over emotions. And it also says that those who are intellectual are the rightful rulers of the globe. Those who are emotional are too, are too scattered to be singly focused on anything. When in actuality, emotions are not scattered at all. Emotions are what give us a sense of oneness with everything around us. If you feel emotion when someone harms a dog, how come you don't feel that same emotion when someone squashes a bug outside when the bug is not even bothering them? That the emotions are not just tears and trembling. Emotions are the sympathetic nerves that causes us to feel with the universe itself. Our intellect detaches us from it because we are trying to process what we are feeling rather than to embrace it. Why do I cry all the time? Why is it that my heart goes out to this bird that somebody shot for no reason at all? That doesn't mean that animals are not used for food. Animals realize their existence in this earth more than you know. The Native Americans talk about how they would follow the buffalo, and the buffalo would give up one for their group to eat, and there was no problems with that because there was no wasting of food. That everything that they took from the buffalo was for their survival, and there was a oneness between the Native American and the buffalo. This is the sense of emotions that I'm talking about. What we have done, we have allowed intellectuals to define what emotions are, as opposed to understanding the purpose of emotions, as opposed to the distinctive separation of intellectual beings. And when I talk about intellectual being versus emotional, I am talking about those who put what they have read as opposed to what they've experienced above everything else. Simply because you can quote some philosophers or can quote the law or can quote the scriptures, it doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. The question is, what does it represent? Because I promise you that when I studied the philosophers, I had no idea how stringent, how out of touch, rather, intellect was to emotions, and how upside down that was, and how the whole idea of the Cushite universities was not for the purpose of developing intellectual skills. The universities of the Cushites were for the purpose of developing emotional skills, being one with the earth, understanding the universe itself, the physician knowing which herbs, which plants to use, the astronomer studying the stars and the movement of the planets, so they would know what time of the year to plant, and what time of the year that the weather would be conducive for movement. There was not studies just to lord yourself over anyone, and to use your understandings to manipulate people or to impress them. Thank you. Question.
Just as you spoke, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was just asking the question.
As you spoke, it reminded me of something I think I'd seen earlier, and we'd seen earlier about Noah's three sons. Japheth is the one who went to Europe and settled that area. And Japheth is supposedly the one who had intellect. And it said that Japheth would dwell, I guess, in the tents of Shem or something like that, while Ham's son Canaan was cursed. And if you look at where Shem is, Shem's group settled in the Saudi Arabia area right there, where that boot is, in between Africa and Europe, and that. It's almost like the people descended from Ham who had the emotion, who had the closeness, who developed technology, etc., who knew the rules and the laws of the universe prior to any of these folks. It's like we're there to bring some perspective and to some reunification of this intellect, Japheth, of Europe, with Shem, to balance it almost. It's almost like when you look at it geographically and not just from the spiritual perspective, even the way that we geographically separated ourselves define that spiritual truth of what each one of those stood for. And I don't know if that resonates, but it's what I saw as you all talked.
Yes, and also, Barbara, and what you just stated, when Ron, mentioned about consciousness, and as Pastor shared earlier in terms of spirituality before religion, when we, can appreciate the cosmic consciousness in terms of, again, how our ancestors were able to process, their intuition in terms of what they was receiving from the universe. The Dogon tribe talked about 4 stages of consciousness. When we talk about unconsciousness, where a person is not really, grasping in terms of what it means to think or to be able to create, then it talks about, the simple consciousness in terms of one being able to begin to develop. And then it goes on to talk about the self-consciousness when you come to a point of knowing and knowing how to create. But I think the last one, again, is that cosmic consciousness when you talk about that divine being that we are, and now being able to move from what we know to what we have the opportunity to do. But I was just trying to tie it into those stages of consciousness because there's some people who are at that vegetative stage where they're unconscious and sort of in that cycle of stagnation where how do I do what I need to do? So when we think about senses, I'm only tying it back into thought now. You know, I am the thinker that create the thoughts that create the things, but not from an intellectual point of view, but from a cultural point of view, which, you know, I just wanted to share those thoughts if that resonates at all with what you said or what we've been talking about. I'm done, Ron.
Thank you, George.
Let's look at Jesus in relationship to what we were talking about. When we talk about the intellectual separation and the emotional integration of everything that is. Jesus, we think about how Jesus taught and how Jesus spoke to people and interacted with them. That was always an interaction in the sense that everyone around him was him and he was them. If you read his words, even in the erroneous the alpha translations, if you read them quietly, you can feel the passion in them. The words that, and what I mean by passion, you can feel what he was experiencing as he taught. When he came in contact with the Romans, he said very little. His words to the Romans were not the words that he spoke to the multitudes. And I'm going to say some things that may make some people uncomfortable, but truth usually does. One of the things that makes it so difficult for us to transcend this process of religious intellectuality based upon the emptiness of philosophy and gather ourselves in the space of spirituality, what makes that so difficult is because we separate ourselves from the source of these emotions, of this spirituality. We are looking externally and processing internally in the wrong way. What do I mean? All the symbols of spirituality are symbols that have been used and still are being used to denigrate our existence. When we think about Moses or Abraham, when we think about the concepts of those energies, when we look at Jesus or Joseph, what we see, especially when we think about Josephus, what we see are Europeans. And what does that do to us psychologically? What that does to us is separates us from the truth of what really is. Why? Because we have our DNA tells us that we are subservient to our Caucasian. So everything that is a deity, everything that's powerful, everything that's supposedly invented, created, or brought into existence, something is presented as that entity. Now, you may think and say that, well, why are you dealing with race? I'm dealing with race because race was presented to me to deal with. I did create a separation of the races. I did not bring into existence racism. I did not paint all the deities in a color that did not exist. I did not bring color into the equation. However, since it has been brought into the equation, since it has been my experience, I must look at it. I must speak of it in order to bring some sense of balance to it. And what I mean by that is this. You cannot bring balance to harmonious chaos. You can only bring balance to harmony itself, to attain harmony itself. And as long as we look at these deities in the way that we see them, the way they are presented to us, as long as we look at those who have created things, or those who have been presented as the great intellectual minds, as being separate from us, different from us, then we will never be able to truly embrace our real identity, our true identity. And our true identity is not a color of a skin. Our true identity is that of spirituality. However, we have spent centuries making every effort to separate ourselves from spirituality and become one with those who have no sense of spirituality, only a sense of intellect. And that intellect is based upon the ignorance of those who raided the libraries of Egypt and Cush. And the reason this intellectual thing was developed and the separations took place is because the lack of understanding. So they made it up as they went and created a cultural society based upon separateness. It is incumbent upon us, based upon the reality of what is, to bring into existence a society of harmony. Right now, what we are experiencing is the same chaos that existed when we thought we were living in harmony. When we thought we were doing the 70s and 80s and part of the 90s, when we thought things were settling down and we were living in harmony or getting close to it, there was excessive chaos beneath the surface, but it was being hidden. The symbol of the exposure of that chaos is Donald Trump. And that symbol of the exposure of this chaos is there for a reason. The ignorance of this symbol, the lack of what his predecessors called intellect, the lack of compassion, all of these things existed beneath the surface, and it appeared to be a harmonious existence when in essence it was chaotic. Now that has bubbled to the surface, it will not be settled through intellectual conversations, neither will it be settled in the hallways of Congress. It will not be settled by an executive signing an order to bring it into being. The settling of it will only come when we face the truth for what it is and see and connect and recognize that we are one with the source of spirituality. It is at that point that harmony begins to exist. It is at that point that we dispense with all of these ignorant terms and ignorant actions of racism and misogyny. These things are there, and they will remain there unless we honestly address them. And the way we have been kept from addressing them is because we have been told that's not in the Bible. That's not what we are supposed to be discussing. Yet, when you look at Jesus and understand the historical essence of what was taking place during that period, Jesus was not allowed to go into the centurion's house. He had to go to the back door and could not enter unless he was given permission to, even at that point. So we have to face the reality of what's been presented to us from our ancestors and through our Creator, as opposed to through the God that has presented itself as a God to us and we embraced it. And the embracing of it is evident every Sunday morning, especially when the words that comes across the pulpit are the words that were written, the words that were placed in seminaries by those who were racist, by those who care absolutely nothing about anything other than themselves and what they could get from the earth and other people. So I think it's time for us to stop skirting the issues of what is really in existence. It's time for us to do a deep dive into the reality of how this earth became the way it is. How did humanity become the way it is? Where did this separateness come from? When we began to do that, then we can begin to knit the society, or bring it back together, rather, and a tapestry of pleasantness, a tapestry of harmony, a tapestry of love and kindness. But until then, we're going to be threads separate from each other, trying our best to pull those threads together. That's not going to happen until we fully deal with the reality of what exists now and the origin of that existence, and it is definitely in the scriptures as well as presented to us in the on the pages of those who have done the research to understand the historical nature of our existence. Thank you. Unless there are questions or comments, I'm done.
Good morning. This is Amir. I'd like to share a scripture that to me says a lot about what the issue is of what you're talking about. And that's from the book of Titus, the first chapter, 15th verse. To the pure in heart and conscience, all things are pure. But to the defiled and corrupt and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Their very mind and conscience are defiled and polluted. They profess to know God, to recognize, perceive, and be acquainted with him, but deny and disown and renounce him by what they do. Action speaks louder than words.
Thank you, Amir.
What's that scripture again?
That was the book of Titus, chapter 1, verse 15 into 16.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That fits beautifully. Questions or comments? I have a thought that kind of hit me when we in the midst of this discussion here. We, as Pastor said, look at the people in the scriptures and characters in the scripture, and it's hard because that's the way we've been taught, we've been brought up. We see people, and they don't look like us. We're just moving to a place beginning to be us when we look at these things, and you know, what if all this time, how we've been taught, how we've learned, what if we are the people that have a form of leprosy? Leprosy is that person who is filled the full rhythm, cannot get in rhythm with the universe. He cannot feel what is there. Things don't always resonate with him, and I say that because if you look at how we have defined intellect, what if intellect is a form of leprosy? It does not allow you to be in rhythm with truth, and it hides that light under a bushel basket, and you don't see a value in pursuing this. You are so, as we have in the past, and been taught that the intellectual thing is what is to be valued in the earth. We are just battling with that and seeing the truth of that. So we are getting rid of our leprosy, and part of that, as Pastor and Barbara has described, is it be painful. It can be comfortable, is a better word, to get to know self. And when we move to what George defined as that divine part of consciousness, that's where we want to be. That is the part that is beyond intellect, beyond religion, beyond those things that hurt you. It is the place of unity. It is the place of compassion, and it is the place that we get to know ourselves to in the fullest and embrace who we are and what the journey is about. One of the things that I learned from this is getting to that divine consciousness, or how important the memory part is, the recognition and the seeing the journey and embracing the journey. And not only that, it is the memory portion that also embraces the ancestors. So if we allow it to, it is that energy, the energy from the ancestors, the energy that pulls everything to you, is what helps bring us and keeps us in balance. So it's just hard to put in words how valuable this is, and what a unique thing it would be in the earth for man to pursue this and start to bring balance in the earth. So the things that Pastor described, and even the pursuit of other men, matters not if we don't center ourselves, if we don't come to our own place of consciousness, if we're not aware of who we fully are, if we are not trying to bring balance to who we are by, as difficult as it is, and you heard me say what Barbara said was therapeutic to me. I do sometimes avoid, and I even ask myself, why are you afraid to know you? Why is this so uncomfortable to you? So I'm learning to embrace this more and appreciate it, because it's there for me. What is in me is there for me, and it does not run from me. And so I'm learning to embrace it. But I just want to put that out there. I think, just based on our conversation, our understanding, pursuing intellect is a form of leprosy. You cannot feel the vibrations of the earth, because you are alone. You are alone, and you want to be separated. So there is no unity. There is no oneness in that type of pursuit. So I just want to add that part. Questions or comments?
I agree with you, Ron. Intellect. Go ahead, someone else.
This is Audrey. Good morning.
Good morning.
I agree with you, Ron, but I think it takes a certain amount of intellect to get to a place where you can think for yourself and think for yourself and get to a point where you realize that what you're being taught is not the truth. But yes, I agree that anything that you put on a pedestal like that can become like an idol. So yeah, I agree, but I think it does take a certain amount of intellect to get to a place where you can recognize that you're not being taught the truth.
The only way I believe that you can get to a place where you realize you're not being taught the truth is that you have to be able to compare it to something. The thing that you're actually comparing it to is intellect versus spirituality. When you begin to see that intellect gets you nowhere, then you start searching for something else. And that something else that you're searching for is you, which is spirit. Because the foundation of intellect itself, would you mute your phone, please, or check to make sure they are? The foundation of intellect is confusion and confrontation. And that's for the purpose of control. And that has always been the purpose of intellect since its origin in those Greek philosophies. And if you really think about it, what has intellect done to us? If you think about it, it has brought us to a place of the other. I am strong intellectually. I understand all the blah, 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 but they don't. And this whole, if you look at the origin of this thing called intellect, it has always been about the intellectual and the other. And if we want to think about it in today's terms, then we look at the origin of that and where it comes from. Let's look at the way this system is set up, and it's not godly in terms of Elohim at all. The system from its origin has always had wealthy white men in charge. In the last election, in the Trump election, I was listening to the people talking heads, and there were, I think it was like 15 people running in that election, and the one who bubbled to the top is Trump. Out of all of those men who are quote unquote intellectual people, and on the Democrat side, there were 5 women, and what bubbled to the top are old white men. So when we look at it from that perspective, why did that happen? Because what the key to control is when it comes to an election is electability. The reason we didn't choose a woman and we chose Biden is because of electability. What is that saying? What that is saying is that it is the way that males European males have always defined themselves, and has always been into opposition to what they are not. Though every one of them are opposed to what they are not. They're opposed to femininity. They're opposed to the African. They're opposed to people of color. They're opposed to nature. They're opposed to everything that they are not. And anything that they are is the only thing that they embrace. And when we look at that, it took a person who is considered to be one of the least intellectual people that anyone have heard of to bring to the surface the weakness and the weakness and the deceptiveness of intellect itself. Because if intellect was not standing defective, or if it was not weak on its own, then there would never have been a Donald Trump where he is. It is more spirituality. And you're right, Audrey. Intellect brings us to the place where we begin to see who we are and understand the power and the strength of spirituality over this thing that we call intellect. Because when we think about what we call intellect, it's about being well read and being able to read, write, etc. However, there are people who could not read and write, but were highly intellectual. I remember very vividly that this pastor would come to our house on Thursdays for dinner when I was growing up, and he and his wife would come, and he and my grandmama would sit in the living room, and she would read the scriptures to him because he could not read. And he would formulate his message based on the scriptures she read to him. And Sunday morning, he would stand in that pulpit, quote those scriptures, and preach. And nobody in there knew that he couldn't read. And he was chosen to be at this particular church. And this pastor who wanted that particular church told the people he could not read and write, and that's why he didn't get it. So what happened? What happened? Intellect interfered with spirituality, and the intellect won, and the people suffered as a result of it. Thank you.
Great discussion, y'all. Where are we? Any questions or comments? Is this making sense?
Yeah, Ron, this making sense.
I do believe that these types of discussions, as the ones were previously, gets us to a place of emptying ourselves so that we can be filled with the essence of who we are. And I don't mean that literally. I mean that figuratively, because we are already filled with who we are. It's simply that we must become aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
I beg your pardon?
Yeah. I said, yes, sir. I'm just agreeing with you.
So it's more of a, it's not even a purging, I don't believe. I think it's more of a realization of how we are fearfully and wonderfully made that brings us to this place of embracing the essence of spirituality, which means that we're embracing the energy of the universe for what it is, as opposed to creating our own sense of what the universe is. The more that I look at the universe itself and explore this physical world in relation to it, I'm like, Ron, the more I understand I don't know. However, at the same time, I become more aware that even though I don't know, but there are things that I'm experiencing, and that is that this universe and the material world are one, and the only thing that keeps it from being one in our mindset is the distractions. Our unicity with this natural world is paramount if we are to become truly the bringers or the of harmony for humanity. If we are going to save this earth, it's going to take our embracing the spiritual nature, the universal nature of us, even though we can't always explain it. It doesn't have to be articulated in order to experience it. It has to be experienced before it can be properly articulated. And that's where I believe that we are at this time. Because when you think about it, what do? We talk about the energy of the universe in those periods of time when a gateway is open. We talk about the numbers and what they mean. All of them are representing energy, and these energies that are being represented, and the energy that we absorb, the energy that we desire to be infused with from the universe, as like the period of the Lion's Gate, or when the moon is in a certain position, that energy is inexplicable when it comes to intellect. And there are those who believe that we are crazy because of that. This is a total cultural difference in terms of embracing the energy sources. If you think that I'm off base, then talk with people who are in these quote-unquote positions of intellectual status and see what they tell you when you talk about you are a being no different than the being that created you, and that you were created by Elohim, which is known as God to most people. Tell them that you are one with everything in this earth. The ant is you and you're the ant, and see how they look at you. It takes a sense of spirituality. It takes an inkling of spirituality to be able to embrace that, as opposed to continuing to dichotomize the earth, making everything separate from each other or putting it in opposition to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions or comments, y'all? Okay. I tell you what, let me ask you something. I want to look at something today. I want to take this in a different direction. It's already a quarter after. You guys want to, can I take it to somewhere else, or can we, or do you want to stop for the day? What do you think? Any opinions?
My opinion is let's look at it tomorrow.
Okay. If I can give you a hint to what I want to look at, I am really fascinated with looking at the Dogon people and some of the things I've read that they were aware of. It's really fascinating. The spiritualness of their high priest, and so I know George and Pastor and a few others have talked about the Dogon. I don't know if Nick's on the line or not, but a few others have talked about the Dogons, and I want to kind of open that up a little bit, and I think Sheldon is one as well that's talked about them. So there's a lot of things here, and I was wondering if we could just talk about it for a little bit. So let's see how tomorrow goes. Of course, usually we have questions and answers that opens us up, and if that takes us in another direction, we'll do this at another time. But I just let you know that in case you want to look at something, it's a fascinating study. And I want to talk about that and kind of tie that all into what we do. Okay. Any questions or comments about that? Okay. Well, I hope everybody got a thought from today. If not, please write them down. Anything we need to clear up, and we're happy to start there tomorrow. Okay. Not enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and look forward to seeing you. What today? Today's Sunday, isn't it? What day is this? Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day, family.
Bye. Goodbye, everybody.
Good day.
Thank you, Ron.